89% of you have voted in that poll. I'll go over a few housekeeping things before we get started. So we are trying out closed captioning. If you are seeing the words along the bottom of your screen and you do not want to, if you are joining via a computer, there is a menu. If you go down to the bottom of your screen, you can toggle that on or off. If you're joining via a mobile device or a tablet, that would be in your settings in the app. So you can toggle that on off. For this program or programs moving forward, there's a closed captioning in there. If you're watching on YouTube, those closed captions will be on your screen. I'm going to go ahead and end that polling because we're just about at time. All right. My name is Annie Tillman. I am the Adult Program Coordinator here at the Schaumburg Library, and I'm very grateful that you all are joining us this evening. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting Kevin. Kevin is a piper on the great Highland Bagpipes and has been playing for almost 30 years. He is featured at many solo events such as weddings, parties, and other events. Kevin plays the pipes both solo and formerly with the Shannon Rovers Pipe Band and currently with the Dundee Scottish Pipe Band. He also competes in solo piping competitions. He has played before for presidents, Pope John,
23rd.
The 23rd, that's what I thought, Tip O'Neill, Cardinal George, and both Mayor Daley's. Also, he is a graduate of the North American Piping School and the Balmoral School of Piping. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Kevin. If you have any questions, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A or in the chat box, and we'll answer those at the end of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Good evening. I couldn't think of a better way to spend the St. Patrick's Eve than to be talking about the myths and history of the Great Highland Bagpipe. So without further ado, dawning of the day. For tonight, what I'd like to go through, give you an outline, would be an introduction, my background, and also then moving on to the bagpipe anatomy. And then I thought we'd get into manufacturing of bagpipes. I had the pleasure of going to a school where the main instructor brought his equipment over from Scotland up to Wisconsin, and we were able to see how bagpipes are made. Then I thought we'd take a quick tour from very high level on the bagpipes of the world, and then talk a little bit about the regalia. For tonight, I'm wearing some of my regalia, but there's a lot of other items that we wanted to cover. Then something I hope you will enjoy is about 2 years ago, I was invited to go play at the D-Day celebrations, ceremonies, to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings in Normandy, France. What was unusual was it was at Sword Beach. If you know your history on the landings at D-Day, there were 5 landings. Of course, the US landed on Omaha and Utah, and the Brits, the Canadians, and some French landed at Gold, Juno, and Sword. We played at Sword. And then what I thought we'd do is save the questions, although Annie mentioned that we're going to do the chat. So if you think of a question, put it in chat and we'll try and answer that as best we can. So I know he's your brother-in-law, but it's just not working. So I thought I'd start out with this cartoon, and it serves a purpose. No, I haven't played with a mariachi band, and I probably never will, but it brings up a point that bagpipes have a very unusual octave, and there aren't many instruments that can tune to the bagpipe unless they chord like an organ or a piano. So the pipes play on a 9-note octave. And for you musicians out there, an octave, of course, is 8 notes. But with pipes, we have a 9-note octave. Now, my background is I started very late playing. I started after I got out of college. In the old country, they usually start the youth around 6, 7, sometimes even earlier, and they have the dexterity on their fingers and, learn a lot of tunes. But I was fortunate to start with them. Unfortunately, many of the gentlemen that are in this picture have passed on, but it gave me a sense of culture. They helped, some were in that crowd there, some were from Ireland or Scotland, and they shared some of their experiences on piping, and it was a lot of fun. Oops, pardon me. And of course, I've been playing on and off for about 30 years. And I did a lot of traveling for business, so I didn't consistently play, but now that I'm retired, I'm enjoying it, getting back to giving these talks for folks, because I developed this talk after many years of playing weddings and solos and always getting questions about the bagpipes. There's a lot of misconceptions, and that's where I came up with the myths and history of the bagpipes. So I hope to answer some of those questions and dispel some of the myths. First, I thought we'd start talking, now the pipes that most people are familiar with are called the Great Highland Bagpipe. And there are about 144 parts to the bagpipe. And I'll take you through it quickly. Is where the tune is played, is, if you can see my cursor down here, is the chanter. And that's where the 9 notes are. And then in the chanter, you can see right here in this caption, it has the reed. It's a double reed, similar to an oboe or a sax type of reed. And then, of course, up here, the sticks, as some people call them, are the drones, and they provide the chording to the chanter. And of course, the air is introduced through the blowpipe, and the bag acts as a reservoir. And in the drones, there's a good picture here, if you can see it, of the reeds that are used, in all 3 drones. So that's your Great Highland Bagpipe. Now, what you'll see later on in the talk are different pipes from different parts of the world, but there's a lot of similarities, a lot of common items on those pipes. This is how it all starts. This is a cord of African blackwood. And African blackwood, for the most part, is the wood that's used in most bagpipe making today. There are exceptions, and there are some pretty good pipes made with other wood, but overall, this seems to be the best wood. It comes out of an area of Tanzania, what used to be Rhodesia, Uganda. What's interesting is many of the forests are German owned. So the Germans are cutting the trees and sending them to Scotland, usually to be made into bagpipes. There's an idea of how big that cord is. And the gentleman standing to the right, that's Brian Donaldson. Brian, we'll talk a little bit about Brian. He was the former pipe major of the Scots Guards, which is a guard unit of the British monarchy. But he retired, and he was a Falkland veteran, and he came over to the States when he was recruited by Northwestern Military Academy up in Delafield. And he brought all his bagpiping equipment, believe it or not, and set up in a shop behind the school. So what he would do is he'd take that cord and gradually cut it down into rough parts and then put it into inventory. So here's where he's starting with one section of what's going to be finely carved pipes. And here Brian's working on what we call a practice chanter. And he's grinding it down. And you can see the students are gathering around. He took us on a quick tour here. And then that's a roughed out drone. So he'll put that into inventory. This I thought was an interesting example. The stocks that are here are probably being reconditioned. These are silver inlay, and this is a nickel ferrule, and that's probably imitation ivory and more nickel. So pipes being wood, they have to be cleaned up every once in a while. Then in the background, you can see some of the roughed out sections, probably going to be drones, portions of drones. And then this is his inventory. So when an order comes in, when he's in town and not judging games or what have you, he'll pull the items out and then finish them to a beautiful set of pipes. And if you're interested, his pipes that are made here now in the United States are called Inveran. I have nothing to do with it. I'm not a salesman or anything like that. But when he is able to make them, there are long lead times, but they're a beautiful set of pipes. And he apprenticed with a gentleman by the name of Jim Tweedy, who is well known in Scotland for making beautiful pipes. And Brian apprenticed, I believe, right before World War II. There's some more inventory that he has ready to be finished. And these are chanters in various forms, and he's getting ready to finish some up or clean them up if they're being reconditioned. And again, these are some pipes, some being reconditioned, others being made into brand new pipes. Now, a lot of the tools are still hand tools, even though some other pipe makers have a little more automation. Brian still used a fair amount of hand tools. These are some more for the measuring of the chanters, as you can see. I get a kick out of this picture. My daughter took this picture, and what Brian is looking at is what he called a very modern machine in pipe making. Actually, the machine, I think, was made somewhere in the 50s. And what it does is evenly cuts the holes in a practice chanter. But he was very proud of that. The other irony is that the uniform he's wearing is, of course, a U.S. Army uniform, and here he is, a former British citizen. I don't know if he actually became an American citizen, but he was an instructor at the school. They had a pipe band. And here you can see the handwork as he's finishing up the chanter, practice chanter, and you can see the shavings hopefully on the side. So there's a lot of work done by hand in making an individual set of pipes. And there you have a practice chanter. Now, just to give you a little more background on the practice chanter, that's what pipers use to, one, learn a tune, keep a tune active, get fingering straight, etc., and memorize a tune, because you know that with pipers, we can't carry music around and play like some instruments in bands. So this chanter was actually being made for a friend of mine. And there he is putting his trademark on it. And the lady in the back is Sue. And she thinks that she's getting a brand new chanter, which she did, and it's going to improve her play. Maybe. And while we were there, there was an occasion where Brian was delivering this set of pipes to a gentleman who came down from Minnesota, and he had ordered these pipes, and the timing was perfect. And you can see what he's doing is tuning them, breaking them in, if you want to call it that. And a beautiful set. Now, while we were there, just a little side note, the gentleman that ordered these was a gynecologist. And there happened to be another student at this school who was also a gynecologist. So the night before, over adult beverages, they decided to start an association, and they called it the PGA, Piper's Gynecological Association. Very successful. Give you a little tune here. So here's a big question. And before you answer this, I'd ask you to, I'm going to keep you in suspense. And if you will put it in the chat, and Ann and I will read it, let's see what you know about piping. Where do the pipes originally come from? So I'm going to ask you to just put it in when you get a chance, and I'll continue on. But I think you'll find it a lot of fun with some of the answers if everybody participates. So where do you think the pipes come from originally? So with that, jumping into where pipes are, one of the reasons it's the oldest instrument that we know of, one of the oldest, that are still played nowadays. And I found this woodcut that's kind of interesting. It shows a number of different types of pipes. And again, like I had mentioned before, there's some similarities with the bagpipes. The number one, cornemuse, that's French. Number one. Number two, Irish bagpipe. That's called a Brian Boru pipe. We're going to talk a little bit about that a little later. And you got a musette, a Highland bagpipe, and a border pipe. Border pipes, that's a term on some pipes that are actually played in Scotland and North England. And it's usually used, say, in ceilidh, which are dances. And they're a lot of fun. They're not as boisterous as the set of pipes that I play. So I thought I'd take you through a couple of examples, not all of them, because there are quite a few different types of pipes around the world. This was a photo that I found of a gentleman playing a set of pipes, I believe somewhere in Czechoslovakia or around that area. You can see some similarities. He's blowing air into a bag. The long pole, if you will, is a drone, and he's got a little different looking chanter playing a tune. This was a set of pipes. I'm not quite sure what country they're from, but they're interesting, one in design and in structure. The drones right here are coming out of a common stock. And then your chanter is right here, as you can see. And then your bass drone is right here, and your blowpipe. The reason I wanted to show this is with bagpipers, many times they like ornate instruments. So you can see the silver inlay, and I thought it was pretty interesting. This will give you an example a little closer of that inlay. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. These are small pipes. They use a common stock, similar to my practice pipes that I have. Again, you could play it in a room, say your living room, and not be blown out of the living room like if you were playing your great Highland pipes. But you can see the similarities with the blowpipe and the drones, and also the chanter and the bag. And I found this picture, it was kind of fun. This was on the set of The Quiet Man. And if you're familiar with the movie Quiet Man, John Ford, who's the gentleman right here, if you can see him, was the director. And he was a big fan of Ireland. And he came over with John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara and made what I think is one of the best movies ever made. And this was a cast party, apparently. And he brought in some Republic Army pipers. And it looks like they're having a pretty good time. There's an example of another type of pipe. He's playing at a ceilidh, and you can see that there's no blowpipe. He's using a bellows system, which is right here under his elbow, and he's playing on the chanter. Again, a nice tone, good for dancing, and a lot of fun to play. And I found this example of an uilleann piper. Uilleann is Gaelic for elbow. And if you look at this old drawing, right about here, if I can get my cursor, there we go. There's a bellows, and then the piping, he's got the chanter. And with this type of pipe, you have to sit down and play because you're literally strapped in. You got to strap it to your leg. But that plays a couple of different octaves. And probably the biggest proponent of the uilleann pipes of recent years were the chieftains. Paddy Mahoney played them, and it played a beautiful set all around the world. They came up partly because of the suppression of pipers, Cromwell's time and after, when they felt the pipes and the tartan dress was too nationalistic. So the Irish, being clever people, came up with these pipes. Very difficult to play. There are a few pipers here in the Chicago area that play it, but I have not had the opportunity to meet with them. But that uilleann pipe, and even the Estonians have pipes. You can see a lot of common aspects to their pipes. And this is an interesting woodcut that I found. Shows a piper who is Irish, but he was playing on the background on this woodcut was that he's playing on the continent of Europe, about 1514. Well, the story behind that is in Ireland, particularly at that time, it was common that the oldest son inherited the farm from the parents. And then number 2, 3, 4 children had, in most respects, had either work for the oldest son or find some other type of livelihood. And many of the boys emigrated over to the continent to become mercenaries because there were plenty of wars going on at that time. And he's playing an old set. And again, it shows you how old this is, not even back into the really old part of the history. And if anybody knows Polish, I believe that's Polish. That's somewhat similar to that picture that I showed where he's playing a different set of pipes there. This woodcut is interesting, Zambigonia, is because this is an Italian bagpipe. And it's usually played with a lute, which is the gentleman to the left of the piper. And I always get a kick out of that because whenever I see this, I think about times when I've had the opportunity to play at a wedding or some surprise party, and they want you to come through the banquet hall and start playing and surprise everybody coming through the door. Well, I have trouble with that because here's a real picture of the pipes, kind of tough to get through the door. Those are 2 brothers. They make those type of pipes in Italy. And the gentleman over to the left is a collector, believe it or not. Nazakra, that's played in Northern Africa. And then this dual set was interesting, at least I thought it was interesting, because apparently you could take these pipes and either introduce the air into the blowpipe or use the bellows to play the pipes. And I don't know what country that's from, unfortunately. Even the Swedes have a set of pipes. And as I mentioned, I was going to talk a little bit about Brian Boru pipes. They were a set of pipes that a gentleman in Ireland came up with the idea that he wanted to introduce a unique set of pipes to Irish units that were in the British Army, because many of those units actually had pipers also, besides the Scots. And he came up with this set of pipes. And if you look to the chanter, which is over here on the left, you'll notice some knobs in that. That's to change the key on the chanter. So it played a couple of different octaves, or it was supposed to play. And he actually did sell it to a couple of units, but they were a disaster. The units that were in the British Army eventually went back to the Highland pipes. And then talk a little bit about the history, keeping the tradition alive. McCrimmon's were in the northwest part of Scotland on the Isles. And again, when there was the suppression of piping and anything related to the tartan or anything nationalistic, or at least what the English thought were nationalistic, they suppressed the pipe playing. And the McCrimmon family was able to perpetuate the playing. And they had developed a unique system. I call it lilting, but some of my instructors call it something else. And they couldn't even have manuscripts of the music. In other words, music sheets. So they had to teach the students how to play the pipes through this lilting system. They also developed the pibroch and perpetuated the pibroch, which if you go to a Highland game, you'll see some competitions. I was not very successful with pibroch, but it's, again, the classic form of piping, and they were able to perpetuate it. And from what I understand, there's still some McCrimmons still playing the pipes. And then one of the things about the piping, the way it spread, of course, was that the Scottish units were mercenaries. They were raised by the Lord or Duke as a way to gain favor with the King of England. And they produced units, and they were given the right to keep their music and to wear their tartans if they raised an army or a regiment, what have you. So with the spread of the empire of Britain, they were all over the world. So many, many parts of the world saw the pipes because of the Scottish mercenaries. But there was always danger, because usually the pipers were the lead element with some of these battles. And this shows an example of a bullet grazing this set of pipes. This is apparently in the Edinburgh Museum. And that chip right there was because of a bullet grazing the drone. So it's pretty dangerous being a piper. And while I was over in Europe a couple of years ago, we were in Ypres, Belgium, and found an interesting monument. This was dedicated to the pipers who died in the Battle of the Somme. And if you know your World War I history, the Battle of the Somme was a terrible battle for both sides. And the British, and Commonwealth soldiers, lost over 500,000 soldiers in this battle. And you think about it, well, how did they, and with the pipers, they lost something in the area of about 2,400 pipers. These were skilled musicians playing to rouse the troops to coming over the trench. Well, one of the things that the generals forgot, is that the weapons at that time had vastly improved from the 19th century. So there were about 2,400 pipers killed in just that battle alone. I never know when to use restrooms to use in Scotland. So that introduces the regalia portion. That handsome guy, I'll let him do the talking.
I'd like to explain some of the uniform that I'm wearing, or the regalia. What I'm wearing is a typical day outfit for wearing of the kilt. What I'd like to start with is the kilt. And I'll show you, a kilt is, a lot of people laugh at it, but it is a dress uniform, and most pipe bands will wear some form of kilt and then different regalia. The kilt I'm wearing is about 9 yards of material. It's a heavyweight military kilt, and it weighs about 14 ounces. And the 9 yards are taken up mostly with the pleating, which I'll show you in the back. I'm wearing a day coat with a vest. The hat that I'm wearing, as we call a hat, is a caubeen. It's fairly common with some of the Irish units. Other forms that I'll explain in the presentation are Balmoral or Glengarry, and then some bands that have a lot of money will wear the Busbys. Now, if you go to the shoes, you'll see I'm wearing hose, and I'm wearing brogues. And on this side, I have my skein-dhu, which is nowadays decorative. And as you move up, the sporran. Sporran is mostly dress nowadays. Some units will wear the hair sporran. We choose, for the most part, to wear the dress sporran.
So that'll give you an idea of a general outfitting that a piper wears. This is an example of a kilt, and from the back, you can see some of the pleating that goes on to give it that 9 yards of material with the leather straps. And just some of the headwear. This is a Glengarry, and it happens to have the Scots Guards shield on it with dicing. And I would challenge our audience to tell me who else in the Chicago area wears dicing on their uniforms. We'll let you ponder that while I continue on. This is another form of a caubeen, and again, they were worn many times by some of the Irish units in the British Army, and they are still worn by the Irish Guard, Irish Guards, with their unit regiment badge on the caubeen. That's their badge with the crown on top, so you know that's Northern Irish. The Royal Irish Rangers are, in fact, they've been amalgamated. They were disbanded back in the mid 90s, but they had a great pipe band and carried on a good tradition, but they've now been rolled in as the last line unit that's Irish in the British Army. And these are the Balmorals, or beret as we might call it over here. And then this is an interesting uniform portrait. This a dirk. This is ceremonial now. It's actually a sword. And along with the sword, the other portions are a fork and a spoon. So this is what they used to carry when they were in the Highlands and doing whatever they're doing in the Highlands. And then if stopped to eat, they had it, their sword and their eating utensils. And as I pointed out on what I was wearing in that video, the skein-dhu, that's kept in usually the right hose, and it's strictly decoration now, hopefully. And the history was that pipers were usually busy. Both hands were occupied while they're playing, but they needed some form of protection, and this is what they came up with. And it's carried on now mostly as ceremonial. Never tell a man who carries a knife in his sock that he's wearing a skirt. I'm sorry, I blocked it out, but that's what that poster. So there's your skein do in the hose. Now, other units you might see, even around here, some of the bands choose to go with the dress sporran. It's usually military. Sporran, with this type of sporran, it's strictly decorative. The sporran that I wear, you can also put something in it. Don't ask the piper what he's carrying in it, because he might pull out a flask. But this is ceremonial. Oh no, I got my bagpipes in the oven. It's easy to get these things mixed up if you're not careful. So I thought I'd include a couple of captions of some of the uniforms. This was an example of a piper with the Royal Irish Rangers around 1980. A couple of years later, they were disbanded, but you can see him. He's wearing his caubeen. He's playing a set of Highland pipes, and he's got the saffron kilt. If you're picking up the color, that's usually worn by a lot of Irish bands. And I found this the other day. The Republic of Ireland, they call their army Irish Defence. It's a very small army, but they have pipers, and that's their uniform. And piping has been coming back in the Republic after years and years of not much going on, but thank goodness they are playing. And here's an example of the Scots Guards. They're playing at the changing of the guard, and they're in full regalia. They have the spats, the hose. The cape that they're wearing is called a plaid, not a plaid. And their headwear is a busby. Those are very difficult to keep clean. This is an example of the full turnout, and this is the Scots Guards getting ready to parade the colors. But I thought it was a good example. They have about 12 pipers with the drummers. And then, of course, down on the right side, you can see the Scots Guards ready to troop off, and they're standard. And they're usually doing that for the Queen. And I thought I'd include this picture. This was, I believe, the RAF pipe band. Many units over in the UK have pipe bands, as I'm sure you could imagine. But this is a full turnout, 12 pipers. You have the pipe major on your left, pipe sergeant on your right, and then the drum major right here. And in the back, we keep the drummers. We want to keep them under control. The bass drummer, the side drum, and the tenor. Oh, and by the way, they're getting ready to play in the tattoo at the Edinburgh Castle. I thought I'd include this picture. Behind the story behind this is a little history. This was a unit in the British Army, the Irish Fusiliers, and they're pictured here getting ready to play at an officer's mess. And an officer's mess, years ago, pipers were not paid directly by the British Army. They were actually paid by the British officers. And part of the deal was they would come in at what we call dinner, and then they were expected to play. And then each played individually and then some together. And then they were challenged by the officers. They would say, can you do this tune? And then the winner would get a shot of whiskey. So great reward for good playing. Then I thought I'd include this to tell a little story about the civilian piping. This tells a story, not all of it, but tells a story about civilian piping. The biggest event, one of the biggest events in Scotland, is the World Games. So they're held in Glasgow usually. And there's usually about 5,000 pipers that compete in this. It's held in their various grades, in other words, quality levels of piping. This particular picture was a picture of the Field Marshal Montgomery pipe band, which is from Northern Ireland. And they just found out, obviously, that they won the championship again. And when I say again, they won it 12 times. So 12 years they won it. There was only one break, and that was when the St. Lawrence O'Toole band from Dublin, Ireland beat them. So it's very, very competitive, and you can see why they're happy. It takes a lot of work, both in band and if you do the solos. So the question is it all the practice worth it? Well, if you look at this gentleman, I think it is, but others may not agree. Now, I'd like to set the stage on this a little bit. This is a friend of mine got this, and it is a story when we were invited, I was invited to go over to the ceremonies. We played at Sword Beach. And Sword Beach, if you know your history, is where the Brits landed along with some French commandos. And while I was there, I was just treated royally. The French, even though my French is only from grammar school, were just exceedingly grateful for all that the US and Britain did to free their country. So this ceremony was going on at the same time as the other beaches, and including Omaha Beach, where Trump and Macron, the president of France, and the Queen celebrated the ceremony. So I'll play this, hopefully. That's 6:30 in the morning.
Présentez-les-en! Présentez! Out! Faites reposer les hommes. Reposez. Hop. Repos.
Ils se sont mis dans l'axe. Ils sont passés de l'autre côté du bateau.
Pipes and drums, fire right!
Rejoindre le général de Gaulle, un
March!
Let me get out of this. Just something I didn't mention, pardon me, I mentioned was that these pipers were from all around Europe. We even had a couple of German pipers, but in my experience, this was the first time that pipe commands were given in French. So again, I'm not that good at French, but I kind of felt my way through it. But it was an amazing event. And while this was going on, the other beaches were celebrating, and we were done by about 7:30. Later on in the day, we went to Pegasus Bridge. And again, the history there was the Brits and the French were protecting the left flank on D-Day, and they seized this bridge. The glider troops from the British Bucks and Ox unit, if you saw the D-Day movie, The Longest Day, depicts it pretty accurately, captured the bridge and prevented the German tanks from flanking our US soldiers, but the people in France are just amazing. They couldn't be more thankful. I always thought that the French were kind of snooty, but not in Normandy. They were very appreciative. Then they found out my father served in World War II, and they even more gracious. And those soldiers that were there, that was part of the SAS unit of the French Army or French Navy, and they're equivalent to our SEALs. And if I don't know if you can see it in this picture, but if you caught some of the pictures, they have a mask on because they're fighting the terrorists and they're protecting themselves from identity. So it was quite a scene. The other beaches are, for the most part, similar to Sword, but some are more built up than others. But keep this picture in mind because now, and that's myself, the fellow a couple of rows to my right, he was from Ireland, the Republic. And then I think, well, you can't see it in this picture, the fellow in front of me was German. So it was quite a mixture. And because I was the only American in this group, they had to give me a bodyguard. Lucky me. Now this picture I found, I think you probably have seen this in some D-Day histories, but this picture is unique. The fellow there in front of you is actually Bill Millen, the Mad Piper. That's why we were over in Europe commemorating what he did on D-Day. Now this picture you can't really see up close, but they're actually the first wave, they're landing on Sword Beach. And if you look closely up here, these soldiers are actually hiding behind a tank because they're still shooting. The Germans are still shooting there. And when Bill landed, they were shooting. And he played on the beach during the shooting, the first wave and subsequent waves of British and French troops. And that's why later on, after the war, he was interviewing a couple of soldiers that were in the German army, and they asked, well, why didn't you shoot the piper? And Dummkopf is what they said, because Mad Piper. So the whole ceremony for the pipers, that's why every year they come over and celebrate Bill Millen. He died in, I believe, 2010. And then they put up this statue. This picture was taken when we first got there in the morning to commemorate the landing, about 6:30. So that's why it's pretty dark. But they put that statue up in 2013, and it was based on his agreement and a replica of him playing on the beach. And this is a little better picture of what they put up in his honor. His son was there at the ceremony, and he played one tune on the pipes to commemorate his father. So I'm about done. So you can start the party now. And I think Ann and I will take the questions and fire away.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kevin. We did have one come in while you were doing the presentation. Were bagpipes used to, were they made to use on ships to cheer the sailors on? Pardon me.
Oh, sure. Sure. I mean, it was a musical instrument, and the advantage is it's very portable. The French Navy, matter of fact, has a pipe band, and they every once in a while show up at Edinburgh during the tattoo. So it's fairly common.
How did you get into playing the bagpipes?
Well, I got tired of lugging a piano on my back. My mother was a concert pianist, and I figured I better take up something that's easier to carry but harder to play. So I took it up after I got out of college because of the culture and the mystique about piping. And I have played it on and off over the years. Like I mentioned, maybe at the beginning, towards the end of my career, I was in the paper business and had to travel overseas, but I couldn't play the pipes in a hotel room because who knows, the guy next door might be English. So I didn't, you're gone for trips, you come back, and I'm not competing anymore because frankly, I've gotten old. I'll leave it up to the young guys. So I'll do all the talking, but I won't do all the good playing.
The Chicago police have dicing on their hat. We got
Very
a
good,
comment coming in.
very good. They got their
Evan was
idea
wondering if
they got their idea from the Scots Guards.
excellent. This is an interesting one. Are there many women pipers, and do they have their own groups?
Oh, I get this question all the time. Yes, there are women. Yes, they, up until I think right around World War II, there weren't as many because they were, I'm going to sit down here. They were busy, but nowadays there are some really good pipers. Matter of fact, one competition, I think it was up at Alma, the judge was a lady and a very talented judge and very tough. She cut my knees out from under me, that's for sure. But yeah, you look at the bands nowadays, they're always women. It used to be they were just drumming, and then we got wise, we meaning the men got wise and got them into the piping.
Excellent. Give it another moment or so. Oh, we are having more
Sure.
questions come in. Perfect. How are kilt colors chosen for countries and/or players?
How are kilt colors? Well, nowadays the kilts are registered. In other words, a certain pattern are registered in Scotland. So for instance, if you were Frasers or if you were Scots Guards, you're wearing the Royal Stuart tartan, those are registered. And nowadays, even the US Army, US Marines, my brother-in-law was in Special Forces, they have their own tartan. When I was playing with Dundee, our pipe major got a Dundee tartan, beautiful kilt. So it's really determined by the ability to weave it and produce, the various colors. If you look in some of the tartan books, there are all sorts of different tartans. Nowadays, they don't mean as much as they used to be. Family, I'm a Gregor, or I'm a Stuart, or a Fraser, but they're still worn. So they're very, very picturesque, I guess is the best way to put it.
Excellent. So in the middle of the presentation, you posed a question. Do you have an answer for us?
Well, what did everybody say?
We
Did anybody-
didn't. I don't think anybody took a guess.
No, they didn't?
Scotland. We just got that came in.
Okay.
Any
Yeah.
other guesses?
I've had people say Scotland, Ireland, United States,
Greece
Greece.
is another guess.
But Greece, you're getting closer. It actually, anything regarding history in the UK and the British Isles, you're always going to get controversy. But what they think is the pipes originated in some form or another in Mesopotamia. In other words, where Iran or Iraq is. And then gradually, like anything in history, they moved west. There's even documentation of Nero playing a form of pipes as Rome burned. And then
wow.
the Roman soldiers who conquered what we call England now brought a form of pipes. Although there's disagreement whether or not the Picts, who were the Scottish, not clan, but family that was there, there's disagreement whether or not they adopted pipes. Then the Irish, of course, have to jump in and cause an argument. And allegedly at the Battle of Culloden, the English king hired Irish pipers to play English soldiers to rouse the Scots and scare them. So again, I'm glad I'm not in a pub right now because I'd probably wind up with a black eye.
What is the weight of the bagpipes?
Well, that's a pretty good question. It depends on what type of pipe you have. I don't have them with me right here, but I have two sets. I have what I originally got, which is a Hardie, HRDIE, and they were a good set. They were what was called the Army issue. In other words, if a young lad came into the British Army, that's what he was issued. But I came across a set of presentation pipes with silver and ivory, and they weigh a lot more. I don't know the actual poundage, but you can tell the weight because the wood was heavier and also the ivory and the silver inlay. So they're pretty heavy.
Excellent. Can a piper wear his family's tartan?
Sure. Yeah, in the olden days and still now at some of the Highland games, clans have their clan tartan and piper, some of the bigger clans, and families, if they are lucky enough to have somebody playing pipes in their family, by all means, there's no restrictions, just so long as they can play them fairly well.
What plaid do you wear? It looks like a Sinclair plaid.
It is. Whoever said that is a very knowledgeable person. I think I know who it is. But yeah, I've worn this kilt for quite a while. Actually, it was a band that the pipe major actually passed away, but we were allowed to keep the kilt. And then the other kilt is the Dundee kilt that we have for the Dundee Scottish.
Excellent. This person says it was also asked where in Chicago we could see the specific pattern that you showed. Can you give us a hint?
The specific pattern, I'm not quite clear on that. What do they mean? You mean tartan?
Perhaps. If you want to clarify that, we can come back to that question.
Sure,
The person that asked that. How do you clean the pipe?
Well, that's you. First of all, what I was taught is you take the chatter out to protect the reed. And nowadays we even have humidors for pipe reeds that you keep the reed in there to keep the reed protected, because otherwise they dry out. And then if you're playing a lot like we used to around St. Patrick's, then you've got to wipe the pipes to rid it of the moisture, because there's a buildup of moisture and scotch and Irish whiskey and a couple other things that are hidden in the bag. Oh, I'm just kidding. But and every once in a while you would take some boar oil and oil the wood to protect the wood, because there are some pipes that are still being played that are close to 100 years old.
Wow.
Or older. So obviously the piper is taking real good care of the pipes.
Could you explain more about how you actually play the pipes? With the mouthpiece, are you filling up the bag, then the air goes through both the chatter and the drones? Or the chatter plays the melody and the drones a 3-note chord? Is it always the same chord?
Okay.
Multi-part. We can come back to each section.
Well, first of all, if you notice in the videos, you have to start the pipes. So you kick it in, so to speak. In other words, you introduce through the blowpipe air into the bag, and you get it up to where the bag is literally tight. And then that'll kick in, and the air will start coming out, both the chatter where you play the melody and then the drones. So if you're a reasonably good piper and you're keeping the air consistent, you're constantly blowing into the pipes so that you're steady. And then the piping, you're playing the tune. And one thing that I didn't really mention is with piping is that we have grace notes, what we call grace notes. In other words, 16th notes. And sometimes we play it in between. Let's say you're playing two Cs. So the configuration on the pipes is like that. But how do you do two Cs? So you introduce a grace note that kind of interrupts the C. And that's one of the illusions that we do when we're playing the pipes. So it's amazing how many tunes there are in piping for a 9-note instrument. It's just amazing.
Definitely. How will you be celebrating St. Patrick's Day tomorrow?
I have a couple more presentations. This one's, I've been looking forward to the Schomburg because of the depth of some of the presentations. In the past, a couple years ago, I'd be down at the parades, but again, I've kind of gotten a little too old for that. And staying out till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, can't do that anymore.
All right, we did get clarification about that question earlier, and it was what I was thinking. You were showing specific headwear, and the headwear had a pattern or a tartan on it. And so you asked us to guess where in Chicago we could see that.
Oh, the dicing. Oh, yeah, sure. The Chicago police, they wear it on their caps, and they got the idea from somebody over in the London and Scots Guards. So I remember years ago, you couldn't tell a security guard from a Chicago policeman. So that's where I think it was O.W. Wilson, I think the superintendent at that time came up with that, but I'm not sure. But anyway, they came up with the idea to kind of differentiate between security guards and the police.
And Kevin, if you don't mind, could you flip back to that slide so people can see what we're talking about?
Sure.
Then we got a comment in the meantime. At least they got to dye the Chicago River green this year. They were very sneaky about it.
Oh, yeah. Hit and run. Let's get to the ads.
I think you passed it already.
Yes, I did. It's in the Regalia. There we go.
Perfect.
So again, you have the dicing. This is a duty cap for the Scots Guards called a Glengarry, and the badge on the side of it is the Scots Guard, a premier unit of the British Army. And they have a tremendous pipe band. What's interesting about the British Army, and the gentleman that I showed, Brian, he used to run the school of piping. They even have a school of piping for the Army in Scotland. And boys and girls come into the Army. They can join at 16, and they're sent to piping school if that's what they want to do. And in 6 months, they're playing what has taken me 20 years to try and get to in terms of quality of playing. And then they're sent to or go to a unit that they requested. So the pipe bands that I'm aware of in the military, the British military, are the Scots Guards, the Irish Guards, and then a couple other units, the RAF, etc. So they keep the tradition of the piping alive over there. And Brian headed up the school, and then if you wanted to be a pipe major, you would go back to school to become a pipe major, and then they send you to whatever unit you were going to be the pipe major. Pipe major in pipe bands is the leader.
Excellent. Well, if you have any last questions, now is your last opportunity. We'll be wrapping up in about a minute. So if you've got anything else that is on the tip of your tongue, take it to the tip of your fingers and type it out. All right, thank you wonderful. Okay.
I forgot one thing.
Were pipes played anywhere besides the military?
Oh yeah, I thought I mentioned that. They're played, oops, they're played like myself, you have over here, you have in the Midwest, you have quite a few pipe bands. The Midwest Pipe Association, if you want to look that up on the web. Although our season is probably not going to happen yet this summer. Summer is usually the time for Highland games around the Midwest. Chicago was usually June 20 something, but that I believe has been canceled. Alma was the first one of the year. That was canceled. It was canceled last year. Then you go to other countries, very big in Australia, as you can imagine, very big in South Africa, even Brittany and France, big. And of course, Scotland, Ireland, both North and the Republic. And I've even seen Malaysia, where else? Brazil has a pipe band. I mean, they're all over. It's literally, I could spend hours if you want to continue on. I'll go for hours on it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening, Kevin. Happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone that will be celebrating tomorrow. Please do it safely. Thank you for a wonderful class and presentation. They learned a lot. Thanks so much. Are our last couple of comments.
Thank you, Ann. Thanks for setting it all up. Thanks
No
for coming,
problem.
ladies and gentlemen.
All right. Have a good evening, everyone.